Joining us now is political commentator Dele Ogun. He joins us from the UK. Dele, thanks for joining us on the program today. Do you agree with the US president that Ukraine could have negotiated a deal much earlier than now?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. How long has Trump been in office and how close are we to peace? It really just took a conversation. Common sense conversation. That's all that needed to happen to get the discussions going. The problem with Zelensky was that he was not acting as if he was a leader of a sovereign state, acting in the interest of his own people. And he was being teleguided by external powers, such that in some sense, his hands weren't free to negotiate a peace. Why? Because it wasn't really his war. It was always a proxy war. We heard Boris Johnson very recently admit that it was a proxy war. The words that he used is that it's a proxy war that we are waging. Google it. Johnson, we are waging proxy war. That's what he was saying.
Nate, let's face it, we're waging a proxy war. We're waging a proxy war, but we're not giving our proxies the ability to do the job. And for years and years now, we've been allowing them to fight with one hand tied behind their backs.
You see, Zelensky now talks about us living in a disinformation space. This is where we've been. The world has been taken to for the last 3 years, as Trump rightly said. It was all disinformation. We were being led to ignore common sense and the obvious. And so Zelensky was being encouraged to hold his position. We're behind you. We'll supply all the weaponry, all that you need, whatever it takes. That was the talk and the goading that he was receiving to keep on and keep on and keep on. And the only reason why peace is being discussed now is because Biden lost and Trump won. Sometimes, we have to set aside the messenger and focus on the message, focus on what's being said. It's absolute common sense. The slaughter made no sense. They're now going to have to come back to peace terms that they could have secured 3 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago. Why? Because Zelensky should have known, and he did know, that there was no way that Russia was going to lose that war. It was an existential war as far as Russia was concerned. And so there was scope for peace to have been discussed and peace to have been agreed, except that Zelensky was being used. And as a leader should have realized that this is not serving the interests of my people.
Well, he doesn't feel like he's being used. The US and Russia are talking now. US-Russia ties were closer when Trump was president about 4 years ago. Beg your pardon, about 5 years ago, or even more than that, when Trump first became president of the United States. And now it seems like they're picking off from where they left off. Relations between the two are warming up again. So where does that leave Ukraine and the rest of Europe?
Very much politically, it leaves them both dead in the water. Because, look, we have to remember that Zelensky was elected on a mandate of peace with Russia, which is what Trump is now in the process of delivering. Zelensky never had a mandate for war. He was encouraged, as I say, by the European powers to go for it, that we were behind you, whatever weaponry, whatever resources you need. But it was Ukrainians dying. He should have known that so long as the Europeans weren't prepared to put their own soldiers in the firing line, that the outcome was always going to come to this. And so Trump is right when he says, if I had remained in power, this war would never have happened. And he's able to, victory for him is, for Trump and America is easy, because he says, I'm here on a mandate of peace. He said it before he was elected. I'm going to stop this war. He's always guilty of hyperbole. He said, I'll do it within 24 hours. Well, it's not 24 hours, but you bet the phone call, the initial phone call will have taken place very, very quickly indeed. And so he's able to say, this is not my war. This is Biden's war. And, there are many things wrong with the US political system. But contrast the British political system. Stammer comes in. It was always Johnson's war. But Stammer can't say, oh, it was Johnson's war. He's left carrying the baby now. Johnson's baby, because it was Johnson who was the gung-ho mop head that was driving the whole agenda, even more ferociously than the rest of Europe. It was Johnson. Whereas Trump can say this is Biden's war, we're in a situation where Stammer cannot say, because that's the British way. When it comes to foreign policy, foreign affairs, there's a single party headed by the royal family. The difference between right and left, conservative and Labour, is only in domestic affairs. When it comes to international affairs, it's a single united party. And that's why Stammer is now left and stuck with the problem that Johnson created.
But it is looking more like, we're looking at the imbalance of power. Trump reaching out to the stronger side in this war, which is Russia, which incidentally is the aggressor, in the war. It does tip the balance in Europe, and it means at the end, Ukraine will be left with nothing, apparently.
Well, I've never accepted the narrative that Russia is the aggressor and that Russia started this thing. There was an understanding, geopolitical understanding of Russia's security interests, which the words weren't forced out of NATO, that they would not move 1 inch to the east. There's a concept in law that you may be 100 yards away from me, but if you're coming towards me in anger, the closer you come, and if you now come into my face, I don't need to wait for you to throw that punch before I can punch you, because I'm anticipating conflict. And if NATO is creeping closer and closer, and Russia's saying, don't come any closer, because if you cross that line, there'll be consequences. But what was NATO doing with Obama and all the rest of them? They were poking the bear. They said, well, test them. We don't think they will. They knew that what was going to happen. It was their opportunity to really push Russia and to weaken them. They calculated on Russian defeat. You see, to understand this narrative, one needs to bear in mind a little bit about the history of Eastern Europe and Russia. Russia was an imperial state under the Tsar. They withdrew from imperialism and colonialism. They were the first in the 1920s. That's where Ukraine came out of, Finland and all those places. Yeah. This is how they were birthed. USSR was in reaction to colonial and imperial ambitions of Germany. So the USSR was a creature of the Second World War that came through. And at the end of the war, NATO achieved what should have been a prize that they should have been contented with, which was the dismantling of the USSR. Russia itself withdrew from the USSR in 1991. That's where NATO should have stopped. But NATO wanted to go further and break up Russia. Now, that was a gamble too far. And now Europe, much more than Ukraine, Europe is now in a situation where it's gambled and it lost, and it's got egg all over its face. And that's why Trump is saying this conversation. We know this war is only sustainable with US resources because of what Biden was doing. I'm calling time on that. If you want to carry on directly with Russia, you carry on directly with Russia.
So should the rest of Europe now align behind the US president, since peace is the goal at the end of these talks?
Sorry, I missed that question.
Should the rest of Europe align behind President Trump, since peace is a goal between Russia and Ukraine, and that, of course, is the goal with the Saudi Arabia talks?
They've got no choice. This war was only ever feasible because of the big boy in the bloc, which was the USA, standing behind the Europeans. The Europeans would not have tried it by themselves. And that's what's become manifest now. All the gung-ho talk and that There must be complete Russian withdrawal from Ukraine territory. Otherwise, the war will go on. We'll do whatever it takes. Their bluff is now being called by Trump. If you're ready to do whatever it takes, he says, I'm out of this game. I'm ready to negotiate terms to bring sanity to this area, to bring peace. And if you want to carry on, you carry on without American resources and without American weaponry. And let's see what the Europeans now do. In fact, when it comes to now, in terms of who's going to secure the peace, I actually think, and seriously speaking, I think the trust has broken down between the West, the European world and the West. It's not NATO troops that are going to be stationed to man the boundary to keep the peace. I actually think it's going to be we Africans. We're the ones who have been watching the madness of the Europeans for the last 3 years, slaughtering themselves mercilessly. And we're saying, what is this how civilized human beings behave? And it's going to be African peacekeepers. We're going to we're the ones who are ultimately going to secure peace. It's going to be our troops that are going to be deployed in Europe, because who else can they trust? The war was so bitter. The Europeans threw all the weapons that were available to them against Russia. The sanctions, the exclusion from even sports events. They didn't even leave sports out, so they left no room for dialogue. And without Trump, this thing could have gone on forever and ever.
So, can I just hazard a guess here with you what Ukraine can negotiate on now?
They've got nothing to negotiate, nothing at all, because their backbone, the spine, as I've said, was Biden's America. Biden's America is no more. It's now Trump's America. And Trump has made it very clear that this is Biden's war. And Trump is not going to sully his record by continuing where Biden left off. He's saying, I promised the American people that I will shut that war down. And that's what he's going to do. So in those circumstances, Ukraine is in an impossible situation. They can't negotiate anything. You can hear it from Trump. He's basically telling Zelensky, you need to leave the stage, because there's never going to be any peace as long as you're there. That's why he came out with the line that Zelensky's support is down to 4%. Of course, that's typical Trump. He exaggerates the number, but by doing so, he gets the message across very clearly that you have no mandate.
Dele Ogun, it's a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
It's a pleasure.